A qualified, competent workforce greatly increases the probability of successful safety outcomes. Qualified and competent people, they know their jobs and they understand the associated risks. Qualified and competent people are trained to execute work safely. Hey friends, it's Greg Corrali. Welcome back. This is The Real Deal, and today I'm sharing essential number 8 of my 10 essentials of safety excellence. Yes, number 8. We are in the home stretch of my 10 essentials. Today we're going to start off with definitions, as I typically have done the last couple of weeks. Then I will discuss the who, the what, and the why of this topic. And then I'm going to finish with a story, a real life story that happens to be a best practice when it comes to safety. Yes, a best practice according to my almost 40 years of safety experience. And I'm sharing it all with you because I think it is the best action you can take to reduce and or eliminate serious injuries and fatalities in your business. All right, so let's do it. So today's session is going to be more brief than it was last week. And I want to hit the high points here and then finish and close with that real life story. So let's do it. I want to start off with definitions. So what does it mean to be qualified and competent? I'm sure you're thinking it's fairly self-evident, but as you know, I don't like to make any assumptions. So let's go to the definitions. To be qualified means to be trained to perform a particular job or certified. All right, so that's qualified. Have you come across unqualified people in your business? I'm sure many of you are chuckling. Haven't we all? Isn't it frightening when somebody who isn't trained in a particular activity tries to perform that task? When they themselves are undoubtedly unsure of what they are doing. But somewhere from deep down inside, they've got the desire, they've got the will, and some level of false confidence that they're going to be successful doing it. Okay, what about competent? You might be thinking it's the same thing as qualified, right? Not exactly. To be competent means to be properly or sufficiently qualified, okay, a degree of qualification, or capable. So let's stick with capable for competence. If somebody's trained on a particular task, does that mean they are capable of performing it? Well, maybe. If that training demands that an employee both mentally and physically demonstrate the knowledge and skills to successfully perform that task, then yes, I'm sure you would agree that that person is both qualified and competent. And that's a great prompt for the story that I'm going to leave you with today, but leave that right there for now. Let's briefly cover the who, what, and why of this topic. Who needs to be qualified and competent? I mean, this must seem all so obvious. Shouldn't everybody be qualified and competent? Theoretically, yes, but we all know that's not the case. There are degrees of qualification and competence. People understand and perform tasks at varying levels. Look, the available populations of qualified, competent workers, supervisors, managers, CEOs, etc., they'd all fit nicely on the normal distribution curve, ranging from the least qualified and competent to the most qualified and competent, and everybody else in between. But when it comes to safety, who really needs to be qualified and competent more than any other group of people in your organization? And the answer is the front line. Yeah, the front line. And that includes how I'm describing the front line now as workers, supervisors, and trainers. Yes, workers, the skilled craftsmen, technicians, production employees, etc. The first line supervisors who oversee their work, and the trainers. I know that's a little bit odd. They're usually considered a support staff, but think about trainers for a minute. Trainers are technically competent and qualified. That's typically how they got the position. They were either craftsmen, frontline workers, frontline supervisors, or both. And then they decided to take a trainer job. And now they train the workforce and they train supervisors in all the fundamental aspects of the work that they do. They train them to perform work safely. So to me, they're the front line when it comes to safety because they're literally training your workforce. All right, so the other groups, right? Safety pros, the ones we've talked about before, safety professionals, line and staff management, executives, union leaders, the C-suite, the board of directors. Do they need to be qualified and competent when it comes to safety? Well, yeah, they're typically qualified for different things, right? They've got different jobs, different roles. They need to be qualified in management and leadership fundamentals, et cetera. But they need to have certain technical qualifications as well. Not exactly like the front line, but certainly to some degree. They don't need to understand the nitty-gritty details of the work, right? That's for the front line. But we'll talk about them in a minute, just a little bit more when we talk about the what. For now, let's posit that it's the frontline workforce, those performing the task that has the potential for injury, those directly supervising the task that has the potential for injury, and those providing the training to both workers and supervisors. They all need to be qualified and competent more than anyone else in your organization. Otherwise, injuries can and will occur. That's not hard to see, right? That's where the injuries are going to occur. And that's where people need to be most qualified and most competent. Okay, what are the things these people need to be qualified and competent on? Well, we just covered technical safety, right? The actual safe execution of work by the front line. So workers, supervisors, trainers need to be qualified and competent on the technical aspects of executing work safely. Great, put it in the books. Now let's quickly rattle off some of the others. Safety pros, middle management, both line and staff. Do they need to be qualified and competent on safety? Yeah, they do. What aspects of safety? How about safety regulations? As they typically advise the front line on safety regulations and how to conform. They also need to be qualified and competent on specific safety practices, safety work procedures, how to perform this particular task safely, how to conduct a job brief, how to don personal protective equipment, etc. Oh, and by the way, the front line, they also need to be qualified and competent on these practices as well. Again, why? Because they're executing them. All right, as you move up in management, middle managers, higher level management, they've got different job requirements, as I mentioned previously, and they need to be competent at those. And some of them are, just a little bit of a joke, yet also need to be qualified and competent on safety policies and procedures, right? Engineers, as an example, they need to design equipment to be operated and maintained safely. Right? Equipment needs to be chosen with safety in mind. It needs to be installed with safety in mind. Everyone in the organization needs to be thinking about safety as they're performing their work, because ultimately somebody's got to operate that piece of equipment. And we want them to do it safely. All right, and then lastly, shouldn't the C-suite and the board of directors at least be knowledgeable or qualified and competent on the higher level safety strategies and policies? I mean, after all, that's what they do, right? Of course they should be. They most likely do not know, nor will they ever know, the technical aspects of safety, but they should at least know how safety policy and strategy, how it trickles down to the rest of the organization. Their job is to ensure alignment, universal organizational alignment, as we talked about last week. All right, third question, lastly, why do all these people need to be qualified and competent? Isn't it also obvious at this point? If the front line isn't qualified and competent, then injuries occur. If safety pros and line management, if they're not qualified and competent when it comes to safe work practices, safety regulations, safety policies, then they could provide advice or enact policies and procedures that increase risk, not decrease it. And if the C-suite and the board, if they're not qualified and competent, then how can they promulgate and advocate for better safety outcomes across the organization? They can't. All right, so bottom line, here's that infamous safety phrase that I've been using for several weeks now. This is safety solid gold, so don't miss it. A qualified and competent workforce greatly increases the probability of successful safety outcomes. This means less people suffer injuries in the workplace. And that's what safety is all about. Okay, let me close with a story and a safety best practice. As you know, and as I've shared before, I worked in the utility industry at 4 major utilities across North America during my career. At one of the utility companies that I worked at, our analysis of injury data and the specifics of some of our root cause analyses reports, they illustrated 2 specific findings. Serious injuries were occurring because of some fundamental mistakes during the performance of work, the first of which was a lack of understanding or a lack of competence to perform the task, and or unsafe behavior by seemingly qualified and competent workers who unfortunately developed some bad or unsafe habits over the years due to maybe a lack of retraining and probably other factors as well. And then secondly, the other thing we noticed was, and drew conclusions around, were a lack of enforcement of safe behaviors through audits and oversight. So both this lack of competence and lack of enforcement led to a culture of what was once unsafe behavior now being acceptable. And that was one of the biggest challenges we had to address. So long story short, management and union, we worked together and we developed what we called a requalification program. Now, later on, that name was changed more appropriately to the Knowledge and Skills Program. All employees were retested in terms of their knowledge through a written exam, and then evaluated while performing critical high-risk tasks at our training center to determine if they could physically demonstrate the safe execution of work. So they had to take a written test, and then they had to perform physical tasks. And they were graded, they were evaluated by both supervisors and union leaders. This led ultimately to the identification of a handful of people, maybe a couple handfuls of people, who weren't qualified and competent. And that's a booby trap in your organization. That's an accident just waiting to happen. So again, management worked with union to find appropriate and alternative jobs for these workers who couldn't ultimately pass the written test after a few attempts, nor the physical test after a few attempts. So look, folks, I've seen the learning curves here that demonstrate that competence and the correct performance of work tasks, along with knowledge, they wane over time. They degrade. Therefore, a retraining must take place every few years to upgrade both the knowledge and the skills of workers. This is, in my opinion, one of the best safety practices I've ever been part of or seen implemented. It removes the potential for serious injury and increases greatly the successful execution of work, the safe execution of work. That's the best practice, folks. That's it for this week's topic. It's essential number 8, qualified, competent workforce. Thanks for tuning in. I'll be back next week with essential number 9 of my 10 essentials of safety excellence. It's the last one before the final one, number 10, which is the essential element that ties all of the essentials together and more than any other element will make your organization safer. See you next week. Until then, take it slow and be safe.